hard to put your finger on just one thing when we see those sell-offs. I mean, yes, that was a contributing factor. But since then, it's pretty much bounced back to where it was. So it wasn't a sort of a fatal dip, if you like.
All right. So this has been regarded as some sort of experiment, if you like, with Bitcoin that we're seeing in El Salvador at the moment. How would you describe it?
Yeah, I think it is an experiment, and I think there's a game theory around Bitcoin that is quite interesting to consider. For example, the US don't like Bitcoin because they can't control it, but what they hate even more is the Chinese currency, or the foreign currencies, Russian currencies. China's the same. They don't like Bitcoin because they can't control it, but they don't like the US dollar because it's controlled by the US. So, each country is essentially in a race to the bottom as far as their currency is concerned, because if they reduce their currency, they boost the domestic economy. And this is an issue we've had since for a long time. It was last attempted to be solved in 1944 at the Bretton Woods Conference. But I think Bitcoin, because it's not controlled by anybody, any country, is potentially attractive to fill that space as the global reserve currency. Now, it's not going to happen overnight. This is a decades or 2 or 3 decades in the making, and no country is going to sit around and put their hands up around the table and say, hey, this is a good idea, why don't we do this? But what we are seeing is this week 2 countries actually saying Bitcoin is now legal tender in our country. And it would be very surprising to me that if we don't see more countries doing that, particularly countries that have already US dollarized, and countries that have got very weak currencies. And it would also be very surprising to me if we didn't, if some of the bigger economies like China, like Russia, even the US, don't at some point or already have accumulated a bit of Bitcoin.
What would you expect with greater adoption from sovereign nations of Bitcoin? What would you expect would be the likely flows that we'd see, and also the behaviour of the crypto?
I think ultimately it needs to become stable, and it will. The timeline on that is probably a decade or more away. It's even though Bitcoin's about 10 years old, or just over 10 years old, it is still really an early stage experiment. The last Bitcoin won't be mined until the year 2140, which is over 100 years from now. So if you look at the experiment from that timeline perspective, we're very early. Although a lot of them, more than 18 million have already been mined. So yeah, it's a stable system with a very unstable price, and that price will stabilize at some point. It could be when Bitcoin's at $1 million a coin, as Fidelity are predicting, or it could be more than that or less than that. I don't know what that's going to be. But at the moment, we've got. It's the experiment, I think you would say, is working pretty well.